We are counting down the 10 most incredible abandoned trains ever discovered, where rusted giants stretch across salt deserts, jungle vines choke forgotten steel, and entire subway cars vanish beneath modern cities. These sites earned their place for their haunting visuals, dramatic histories, and the unstoppable forces that left them behind. Which train graveyard tops the list? Let us begin with number 10. At the edge of Bolivia's endless salt flats, the Uyuni Train Cemetery stretches beneath a sky so wide it seems to swallow the earth. Dozens of British-built steam locomotives shipped here in the late 1800s to haul silver and tin now stand stripped and skeletal, their riveted boilers cracked by decades of wind and salt. After the mining industry collapsed in the 1940s, these iron giants were abandoned. Too heavy to move, they were left to rust where the desert meets the horizon. From 2006 to 2014, court battles erupted as locals fought to protect these relics from scrap dealers, arguing for their place as monuments to a vanished industrial age. Today, over 20 rusted frames remain, caught between decay and preservation, their shadows stretching across the salt like the memory of a lost era. Off the coast of Nagasaki, Hashima Island's concrete walls guard a world abandoned in a single week. In April 1974, Mitsubishi halted coal mining overnight, forcing over 5,000 residents to leave by ferry. Deep underground, narrow-gauge mining carts, some still loaded with coal, remained locked in darkness, their brake handles frozen mid-shift. Workers recall the scramble, shoes scraping on damp concrete as they left behind not just machines but entire lives. The tunnels, barely wide enough for 2 men to pass, now echo with silence. Decades later, those carts sit untouched, a hidden relic of industry cut off in its prime. Beneath the streets of Manhattan and the Bronx, sealed subway cars wait in darkness, their metal shells gathering dust far from the city's rush. In the 1970s and the 1980s, the MTA tucked away decommissioned subway stock in hidden chambers, using the cars for emergency drills and for film shoots. Graffiti clings to faded paint, while locked doors and motion sensors guard these forgotten corridors. Urban legends swirl about ghost trains roaming the tunnels, but records show a practical logic. It was safer to entomb the cars than to risk removal through crowded underground arteries. Here, the city's secrets ride the rails, in silence, unseen, and undisturbed. In the heart of Silesia, rows of steam locomotives stand beneath tangled branches and drifting fog. The Jaworzyna Slaska Yard, now managed by the Foundation for the Preservation of Silesian Industrial Heritage, holds nearly 50 locomotives, many dating from the 1890s through the mid-20th century. Moss creeps across cracked boiler plates and rivets, softening the hulking iron with a green, living skin. These engines once hauled coal and passengers across Poland, but after dieselization swept the country, they were left to the slow patience of rain and roots. Restoration teams move quietly among the relics, brushing away leaves, cataloging faded numbers, and hoping to save what time has not yet erased. A museum worker's diary reads, "Every winter the engines grow more silent, but their stories remain pressed between steel and moss. Here, craftsmanship and neglect entwine, each locomotive a monument to vanished journeys and the stubborn beauty of decay." High in the Eritrean mountains, Italian-built locomotives once conquered steep grades and winding passes, connecting Asmara to the Red Sea. Decades of war and neglect left these iron giants silent, their ornate nameplates gathering dust as rails twisted and stations crumbled. In 2003, a group of Eritrean engineers brought life back to a 20-kilometer stretch of the line, forging replacement parts by hand and piecing together engines from whatever could be salvaged. For one day, whistles echoed across the valleys, children waving from village rooftops as steam poured through mountain air. The Asmara Railway Society called it a victory for memory and craft, a brief return of endurance and pride. Faded paint and polished brass still bear the marks of that revival, standing as proof that even in the shadow of decay, human ingenuity can give history a second breath. In the tangled green of Thailand's Kanchanaburi region, the old Death Railway surrenders to the jungle. Vines choke railcars and corroded couplings lie scattered along forgotten sidings, each one a silent witness to the passage of war and to the slow patience of nature. Humidity beads on rusted steel while roots curl through shattered brake housings and birds nest in hollowed-out carriages. These remnants, once part of the infamous World War II supply line, have been left untouched since a 1997 government order halted their removal, citing both historic value and the wishes of local activists. The line between memory and wilderness blurs as the forest wraps itself around every bolt and beam, transforming relics of suffering into monuments reclaimed by life. In this living museum, steel and vine are locked in quiet struggle, and the past is preserved not by fences, but by the deep, relentless growth of the jungle itself. In southern Namibia, the desert swallows steel year after year. Colonial-era railcars, once bound for the Atlantic coast, now rest half-buried beneath shifting dunes. Their sun-bleached shells stand silent under cobalt skies, sand pouring through cracked windows and filling wheel sets until only the tops of faded logos remain. Every season, the wind scours paint from metal, exposing bare iron to the abrasive grit. Some carriages lean at odd angles, as if sinking into a sea of sand. Former conductors, now desert guides, tell visitors the rails disappeared, but the stories remain. We trade train whistles for dune trucks. Oral traditions keep these vanished journeys alive, passed from one guide to the next as the desert reclaims the land. Here, the Namib's relentless erosion turns locomotives into monuments, each one a testament to time, memory, and the power of the elements. In the far south of Argentina, battered railcars rest where the Patagonian steppe meets the Skyguay. The Viejo Expreso Patagónico, once a narrow-gauge lifeline built between 1922 and 1935, carried freight and stories across 400 kilometers of harsh terrain. When the last run ended in 1991, engineers stepped down onto frozen gravel, recording in their journals the sting of wind and the silence that followed. We left her to the wind, the whistle echoing in the snow. Winters here drive ice into every seam, peeling paint from metal, turning wheels brittle and glassy with frost. Summer sun scorches the same steel, but it is the cold that gnaws deepest as carriages lean into the gale, windows shattered, roofs buckled by decades of freeze and thaw. Locals recall these trains as weathered friends, their hulks now half buried in grass and drifting snow, monuments to journeys cut short by the relentless Patagonian climate. In the silent outskirts of Pripyat and the Chernobyl exclusion zone, a line of rusted railcars sits untouched, their wheels locked in place since the spring of 1986. Days after the reactor exploded, these trains became lifelines, evacuating residents, hauling emergency crews, and carrying sand, boron, and concrete toward the burning core. Then, as radiation levels soared, the tracks fell silent. Locomotives and wagons, some still marked with evacuation numbers, were abandoned where they stood, too contaminated to ever leave. Paint blisters on metal, glass warped by decades of sun and fallout, while wild grass grows through the ballast, frozen. Access today is strictly limited. Only guided tours can approach, and Geiger counters tick steadily near the rails. Radiation remains a measured presence, a constant, invisible force that defines every step near these tracks. For many, these trains are more than relics. They are frozen warnings, preserved not by intention, but by the invisible barrier of radiation. Here, disaster forced a pause so absolute that even time seems unwilling to disturb the scene. On the outskirts of Thessaloniki, hundreds of abandoned railcars and locomotives stretch across tangled tracks, forming one of the densest train graveyards in Europe. Rusted passenger coaches, diesel engines, and freight wagons from the mid-20th century stand in silent rows, their faded liveries overtaken by weeds and graffiti. Drone flights reveal the sheer scale. Dozens of parallel lines vanishing beneath Mediterranean sunlight, broken windows glinting among wild grass. Some carriages have collapsed under their own weight, while others remain nearly intact, their interiors layered with dust and shattered glass. Owned by Greece's national rail operator, OSE, the site's fate hangs in uncertainty. For decades, officials have debated whether to sell the stockpile for scrap or preserve select pieces as industrial heritage. Municipal discussions stall, hampered by the costs of removal and the lure of black market salvage. Preservation advocates argue for a museum or park, but no plan moves forward. In this limbo, the graveyard becomes a monument to bureaucracy and neglect, a place where history, decay, and indecision meet. Urban explorers and photographers drift through the ruins, capturing fleeting glimpses before nature and time erase what remains. Here, the story of abandoned trains reaches its grandest scale, suspended between loss and the hope of remembrance. Across all 10 abandoned trains, one pattern stands out. Nature always reclaims what human ambition leaves behind. These rusting giants aren't just relics, they are living proof that even the most powerful machines are temporary. In the end, time and decay are the ultimate conductors. Subscribe for more forgotten journeys.